Hi there and welcome. Today I want to share with you a few more of those thoughts I first had in late August 2023 when I first began to see that so much about Miss Letby's case just doesn't scan, just didn't scan on so many levels. These were the reflections which led me to conclude that Miss Letby had been the victim of that most amorphous, banal, and therefore insidious variety of evil, bureaucratic evil. This then gave rise to a further reflection on what the fact of this case having happened said about us in our journey as a society. I will start with some of the reflections about why some people are gratified by killing, which helped me in ruling Miss Letby out of that particular category. This will include my take on why historically babies, especially neonates, have not been a target group for serial killers, and also I'll also be making the complementary point that killing babies is a bridge too far, even for the most tough-minded amongst us anyway. This video is a little bit dark in content, so for that reason I feel the need for a short disclaimer. So here goes. In seeking to make the case of Miss Letby not being a serial killer as self-evident as possible, I found it necessary to go deeper into the abnormal psychology of actual serial killers than I would have preferred. Just to be clear, my interest in serial killers is comfortably below the average. While I found Silence of the Lambs an excellent, informative, and thought-provoking film, I've never actually watched a single episode of any of those CSI City Name programs. I would also add that of the many hundreds of books I've read since childhood, not a single one has been about a serial killer or about a serial killer kind of investigation. I prefer to look up at the sun rather than down into the muck. Okay, now I've got that out of the way, I'll dive into what I wanted to say to you today. Repeated killing, like sexual violence, is a perverted source of empowerment for the ego of the perpetrator. The deliberate taking of another's life through your own agency, i.e. not as a state functionary like a hangman or something, is the ultimate act of mastery over your environment. Partly I think it is because you got to play God. Partly because there's going to be a high degree of difficulty and therefore challenge involved in at least one of the following three stages: the planning, the preparation, or the actual the execution of the act, the actual doing of it. That element of challenge is, in my opinion, not qualitatively different to that which motivates less twisted psyches to choose to do things like climb Everest or run marathons. Anyone will be a stronger, more confident, better psychologically resourced person after such achievements. They are empowering. Turning back to the equivalent pursuit of empowerment by the twisted psyche willing to take human life for personal gratification, I would assert that the reason for the absence from the catalogue of serial killers of any who target neonates is precisely this challenge aspect so essential to human motivation. Yes, I hear you shout. What about Beverly Allet then? 3 points on that. First, yes, her youngest victim was apparently was 6 weeks old, but I understand her oldest victim was 13 or 14. Second, the only other baby-killing serial killer I've ever heard of, Lucia de Berg from the Netherlands, was wrongly convicted. Third, America. The place everyone would agree is the serial killer capital of the whole world. Out of its hundreds, many hundreds of serial killers, doesn't include even one baby killer. That final point speaks volumes. Putting to one side the psychological and intestinal challenges of deliberately harming a baby, which I will come to shortly, that very defenselessness has to detract from the gratification from such a killing. The gratification to be had from murdering a neonate must also be seriously diminished from the playing God perspective as well. Human life is the most evolved feature of the known universe because intrinsic to it is the highest known, the highest possible level of consciousness aware of itself. That is our greatest evolutionary achievement and therefore our defining characteristic as a species. It is a genuinely sublime existence which accordingly places a spiritual premium on human life. It is instinctive awareness of that spiritual premium which makes the taking of the life of another so much more consequential to our own sense of self than the taking of non-human life. This is the reason why a real serial killer, like 6'9", Californian co-ed killer Ed Klemper, was suitably gratified by things like cutting the head from a cat when he was a child, but in adulthood could only be pacified by taking human life. That being the case, where is the playing God gratification in taking life which hasn't even come to know the fact of its own existence? A neonate is obviously conscious, but can in no sense be thought to have self-awareness or even the rudiments of personal identity. Tabula rasa is, I believe, the recognized phrase in the psychological and philosophical fraternities. On a reasonable surmise of the gratification which drives a person to kill and kill again, neonates would appear to come in very low in terms of their attractiveness as a target group. As already stated, the absence of any baby killers among the hundreds of these maniacs thrown up by 20th century American society clearly supports this conclusion. As alluded to, I also think there is a complementary repugnance at the prospect of the psychological toll involved in doing harm to a newborn baby. It occurs to me that there is a reasonable probability that there is not a single person across the entire UK prison population who is capable of systematically killing newborn babies, whatever the motivation. I say that with confidence for this reason. We are all cut from the same cloth, and the stomach for such an enterprise is just not something within human DNA. I'm not suggesting that people aren't capable of fatally injuring a baby through loss of emotional control, lazy neglect, or just good old-fashioned human stupidity. What I am saying is that even a professional killer who kills adults routinely or on a regular basis would experience the same psychological crisis after killing a newborn as as the man or woman in the street. In fact, the more psychotic or homicidal or depraved the individual, most likely the greater the abhorrence at the idea of doing fatal harm to a newborn. You see, their subconscious knows that because of the way they live, they have a greater need for this fig leaf of virtue than the rest of us. You see, doing harm to a neonate is an event which would call forth an ego defensive response of suppression and ultimately repression, just to get through the day and subsequently. To then consider doing the same to a second baby would be nothing short of walking with eyes wide open back into a forbidding mental place directly associated with profound psychological trauma. I think we can all agree that avoidance would be an overpowering instinct in that circumstance. Serial killers, even the ones that get caught, invariably scare everyone by being found to have demonstrated traits and behaviors associated with very high intelligence. They are very rational people. As such, in addition to the instinctive impulse to avoid pain just described, there would be the wholly rational reason that to draw so huge a check on one's psychological resources as killing one of the tiniest, most fragile and helpless of persons a second time would be to enter an unknown state of affairs, the only certainty about which would be that the possibility of a full mental breakdown was going to be greater than in one's current state of affairs. An intelligent individual could also not fail to recognize that repeating the act or behavior responsible for previous trauma would, in practice, be to dig up what it had been necessary to bury to preserve the illusion, or delusion in this case, of being a good person. Thinking oneself a good person is something all of us, including those lost to evil, need to do in order to just get through the day. To relinquish that illusion would be to invite a state of existential torment, shortly followed by retreat to the refuge of insanity. And by that insanity, I don't mean like the fun kind, like the Joker, where you just get to avoid responsibility for the things you do. I mean the more prison-like, incapacitating type of insanity. The mentally toughest people in our world are arguably doctors, politicians, elite professional athletes, and like special forces soldiers. My prognosis in the preceding, that I've just given, would be equally true for members of all those groups. Miss Letby's case holds up a mirror to British society, and the reflection is a truly ugly one. The fact that we were even able to give credence to the idea that anyone, let alone someone living the normal life of a 20-something professional, was capable of systematically killing babies is something which just evidences how ethically, morally, and spiritually lost we have become as a society. Ask yourself this. Could this case have seen the light of day 100 years ago, or even 40 years ago? Okay, that's what I had to say to you today. Please feel free to share your own thoughts and any information which you feel might be of interest to myself or any other viewer in the comments section below. And as usual, thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and all the best.